Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and I'm here with our first deck tech for the Tiny Leaders format. So hopefully this isn't the last deck tech that I'm doing for Tiny Leaders. The format's really sweet, and just to go over it really quick, because this is the first video that I'm doing on this format, Tiny Leaders is a singleton format like Commander or EDH, so you're limited to only playing one of any card other than basic lands. You have a 50 card deck with a 10 card sideboard, and for your 50 card main deck, that includes your Tiny Leader that you're actually choosing. Your Tiny Leader has to be a legendary creature, much like Commander, having your legend as your commander. And with this format, the thing that separates it from anything else is that you're only playing cards that are CMC 3 or less. So it really just kind of has you make interesting deck building choices and interesting choices for your leader itself, just because you're restricted to only legendary creatures that are converted mana cost 3 or less. So the one that I have here for you guys is not one that's been around for a huge amount of time. It's actually just Anafenza, the foremost. So within white, black, and green, we get to play a whole lot of really cool spells. And Anafenza herself is just a huge beater, being a 4/4 for 4. Whenever she attacks, she can put a counter on one of our tapped creatures. And if a creature card would be put into our opponent's grave from anywhere, we exile it instead, so it can shut off some graveyard strategies if our opponent's playing something like Reanimator and she is on the battlefield. So Anafenza goes into our creatures here. So with our creatures in ascending order, I have Deathrite Shaman. So I don't really like playing mana dorks in this format unless I'm playing something like Omnath, which could possibly be a deck tech coming up. But Deathrite Shaman is just really sweet because its utility. It can ramp us if we have like our fetch lands in our grave, but for the most part we want the utility to be able to race our opponent by eating away instants and sorceries and making them lose life. And we can also eat creatures and gain life ourselves if we're playing up against something like Burn or heavy red aggro or something like that, so we don't quickly die. Another thing about the format is you have a 25 life starting total, so unlike traditional constructed formats where you have 20, or even just like EDH where you have 40, for this format it is 25. I have a copy of Voice of Resurgence, so 2/2 for green and white. Unfortunately, all the copies of Voice of Resurgence that I have are actually foreign. But Voice of Resurgence, whenever it dies or whenever your opponent casts a spell during your turn, you get a elemental token that is green and white, and it has power and toughness equal to the total amount of creatures you have on the board. So that is constantly going to be changing based on how many creatures you actually have and how many you're putting into play. And it kind of restricts your opponent from doing a whole lot during your turn, and is going to give them more of an incentive to do stuff during their turn, because if they're playing spells and playing counter magic during your turn, you're just getting more creatures for free. We have Qasali Pridemage, so it can blow up a enchantment or a artifact if we want to sack it and pay 1. It also has Exalted, so it can make one of our guys big. And even if we're not using it to blow something up, the fact that it's a 2/2 for 2 makes it a pretty solid beater in the early turns. Scavenging Ooze for more graveyard hate, 2/2 for 2, and it can eat creatures, and it can give us the benefit of getting bigger and also gaining us a little bit of life. It's also good for disrupting stuff like Snapcaster Mage. We can eat whatever the Snapcaster Mage is actually targeting to give it flashback, so our opponent can't flash stuff back. We have Tarmogoyf because we love power creeps within this type of a deck, and Tarmogoyf is easily like a 3/4, 4/5 within this format. You don't want to slam it just immediately out onto the table like turn 2, because chances are it's not going to be very big, and you don't want it to get like lightning bolted or something like that. Chances are that your opponent's going to try and kill that Tarmogoyf because it's such a huge value creature, but that's exactly what we want to be playing in this deck. Just a bunch of really good creatures that, conveniently enough, are just going to be pretty sizable power creeps or hate for other things. Dark Confidant, pretty much like the same thing, because this format is designed in such a way that we're only playing up to 3 converted mana costs. We're not going to hurt ourselves with that upkeep reveal off of him, and drawing extra cards is really sweet. Stoneforge Mystic, so we can find the 3 targets within our deck. We're playing 3 different swords, and whatever matchup we're playing against, we can find the sword that gives us the appropriated protection from that certain color or colors. and then we can put it into our hand. From there, for 2 mana, we can actually throw the equipment onto the battlefield if our Stoneforge survives for a turn. But usually most times people are going to kill off the Stoneforge before you have a chance to even like throw it out onto the battlefield, the enchantment that is. Mirran Crusader in the deck because the 2/2 for 3 with protection from black and green is just huge, especially if our opponent is exclusively playing like a black and green deck. Just being able to narrow down what our opponent's able to block with is really great, and throwing a sword onto him to give him like protection from white, red, black, and green is just absolutely huge. We don't get to play Body and Mind in this format because it's actually banned, but if we were able to, just like the double triggering off of Body and Mind would be insane. But even still, with things like Fire and Ice and War and Peace, it's just really amazing being able to do a whole lot of little interactions and a bunch of little triggers. We have Monastery Mentor because we are playing a whole lot of non-creature spells within here. So whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we get another monk that has prowess, and the Monastery Mentor itself has prowess. So it's pretty easy to make a overwhelming board state just with the Monastery Mentor and a few like removal spells or something like that. No, we dropped our next card. It is actually Wolfir Avenger before we get to that Loxodon Smiter. So Wolfir Avenger is our 3/3 for 3 with Flash and Regenerate. So at the end of our opponent's turn, we can flash in the Wolfir Avenger or just keep removal open. So depending on what our opponent's actually doing, we can choose to flash in the Wolfir Avenger and have another threat on the board. Or we can just choose to use the removal and keep our Wolfir for a open shot to actually just flash him in. The fact that he has Regenerate makes him pretty resilient against most removal. We also have our Loxodon Smiter, which was, he was very anxious to get out there. He's a 4/4 for 3. He can't be countered, which isn't hugely as relevant in this format. But if a spell or an ability that an opponent controls causes us to discard him, we put him onto the battlefield instead of putting him into the grave. So if our opponent's playing like Liliana of the Veil and they force us to actually discard him from hand, we get him for free onto the battlefield. Equally so for things like Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize if our opponent's playing them. We do have Brimaz, King of Oreskos, so whenever it attacks, we get a 1/1 that's attacking alongside it. The token also has Vigilance, and whenever it blocks, it gets a 1/1 token with Vigilance that is going to be blocking alongside it. Brimaz himself has Vigilance, and it's just a really sweet way to generate a whole lot of board presence with just one card. Over the course of a couple of turns, you can really just get in a whole lot of damage. Witchstalker, just because I really like hexproof creatures within this format, you narrow down your opponent on what they're actually able to use on you, and they're just kind of forced to have to find cards that just force you to sack, to force you to get rid of cards like Witchstalker, and also the Troll Ascetic that we're going to get to. But 3/3 for 3 hexproof, whenever an opponent casts a blue or black spell during our turn, we get a +1/+1 counter, so it'll get bigger. And then our Troll Ascetic, so it can't be the target of spells or abilities that our opponents control. And we can also regenerate it for 2, and it's a 3/2 for 3, which is just fine by us. Now for our non-creature stuff, so our other spells that we are actually playing in the deck and are otherwise removal here. We have Swords to Plowshares, so exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. We have Rancor, which gives our enchanted creature +2/+0 and trample, and whenever it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, we get to return it to our hand. We have Inquisition of Kozilek, which will allow us to take a look at our opponent's hand and take a card with CMC 3 or less that is non-land, and we force them to discard it. So a great thing about this format is chances are it's going to be like anything. Well, it is going to be anything other than a land. Abrupt Decay, which is pretty much just like the best removal spell that the format has, especially in black-green. Can't be countered by spells or abilities. Destroy target non-land permanent with CMC 3 or less. One thing to remember about X spells within the format is after they hit the battlefield, so things like Genesis Hydra, that's a 2 converted mana cost card because it's X green. Once it's on the battlefield and all, it's still just a 2 converted mana cost card. We have Bitter Blossom, which is going to allow us to get tokens every single turn at the cost of 1 life per turn. So the Bitter Blossom is great just because it generates more attackers or blockers for us, especially if we're on a unfortunate board state where we don't have enough creatures to like actually stave off what our opponent's doing. If we're just making a 1/1 to block like a 4/4 that we can't deal with every single turn, that's pretty okay, just in that we're trading 1 life for not taking 4 every turn. But otherwise, the Bitter Blossom's pretty easily able to either provide tokens that we can put swords onto or just kind of overwhelm the board. I have Golgari Charm here, so we can wipe out small creatures that our opponents are playing. So if they're playing something like elves and they're playing like a bunch of like X1 creatures, we can go -1/-1 to all of their creatures. We can destroy target enchantment, which is good for just narrow implications, or regenerate each creature that we control. So in the case of our opponent just finding something that can destroy like 1 or 2 of our creatures in a swoop, we can just regenerate them. It also provides for a good combat trick with the regenerate as well. We have Good for the Throat to destroy target non-artifact creature. Sylvan Library, so essentially allowing us to draw 3 for our draw step, and then put 2 back unless we want to pay 4 life for each of those cards, each or just one of them. But either way, just getting to draw extra cards and then just put it back is really great for us, because we get to see more cards and we get to manipulate what we're actually drawing for our turn effectively. Just kind of gives us more options for what we actually get to do. Smother to destroy target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less, can't be regenerated. Just really great for 2 mana. Liliana of the Veil to force our opponent to discard cards. We can also force them to sack creatures, which is good up against other hexproof things. And if we hit that ultimate, we're taking all of their permanents, separating them into 2 piles, and they're forced to only keep one of those. Their choice, but either way, we're probably going to get rid of a lot of value. Pernicious Deed to just kind of wipe out all things that we don't want our opponent to have. So if they have like a lot of overlapping CMC cards, we can just wipe out everything. Even just like if we have like a bunch of like 3 converted mana cost cards and everything that our opponent has is like 2 converted mana cost or 1, we can just go Pernicious Deed for like 2 and destroy all converted mana cost cards of 2 or less. So the Pernicious Deed is just really great whenever we have higher stuff and our opponent has lower CMC stuff. Or we can just like completely wrath the board entirely if our opponent's way ahead. Toxic Deluge, basically another wrath for us. We can pay X life whenever we cast it, and all creatures get -X/-X for 3. Unflinching Courage, which is great for like our hexproof dudes. We can give a creature +2/+2 trample lifelink, and we could just kind of gain back either a little or a whole lot of life, depending on what we're actually putting the Unflinching Courage onto. We have Council's Judgment, which is just kind of another universal removal that we have for just anything that we don't want our opponent to have, whether it's like an enchantment, an artifact, or a creature, or even a planeswalker even. So starting with us, each player votes for a non-land permanent that I don't control. Exile each permanent with the most votes or tied for the most votes. So chances are, chances are very, very likely that it's just going to be one thing, but there are some really odd instances where maybe our opponent wants to exile something of their own just because they don't want to have that, and something else is going to go on their following turn that they're planning for. But for the most part, Council's Judgment basically reads that you're getting rid of like 1 non-land permanent. We have Abzan Charm, which will either allow us to distribute counters on our guys to make them bigger. In the case of combat math manipulation, we can draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, which is really great. Or we can exile target creature with power 3 or greater. So just as all of the modes that the card has, it's very impactful for this type of a format especially. So now for the swords that we can fetch with Stoneforge Mystic. So the first one is Sword of Feast and Famine. So +2/+2 pro black and green. Whenever the creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and we untap all lands that we control. We have Sword of Worm Peace, which gives +2/+2 pro red and white. Whenever we deal combat damage to a player, they're going to lose life equal to the number of cards in their hand, and we're going to gain 1 life for each card in our hand. And especially with like Mirran Crusader, that's just absolutely insane, the triggers that we get with it. And Fire and Ice with pro blue and red +2/+2. And we are going to be able to deal 2 damage to target creature or player and draw a card on contact. Now for the lands that we're playing in the deck, we're playing Command Tower just to start. Because, I mean, why wouldn't you be playing Command Tower in here? Unless you were playing like mono green Omnap. We have Windswept Heath, Verdant Catacombs, And we have Marsh Flats for our fetch lands to be able to search up our various targets within the deck. We are playing a set of the duels in our colors, so a Bayou, a Scrubland, and a Savannah to be able to just have immediate on-color lands on the battlefield that are going to come in untapped. Equally so for our tapped lands that we can pay to have come in untapped, we have our Overgrown Tomb, Godless Shrine, and Temple Garden for shocks. So for check lands, I have Woodland Cemetery and also Sunpetal Grove that will play off of us having a forest or plains, or in the case of Woodland Cemetery, a forest or a swamp. Stirring Wildwood for just 1 man land also has reach, which is great. We can become a 3/4 reach creature for 3. Horizon Canopies for another utility land where we can just kind of sack it and we can draw a card off of the Horizon Canopy rather than having it. And for our basics, we're just running 1 forest, 1 swamp, and 1 plains. So that is our main board. Now we are going to take a look at the sideboard. So for the sideboard, the first card that I have is Elixir of Immortality. So up against any strategies that are trying to mill you out, so any of the like mill variant decks, you're able to just play Elixir of Immortality to hopefully prevent them from milling you out. It also helps you in really, really grindy games, so you just don't deck yourself, and it also gives you the resource of reusing cards again. But also up against like heavy red aggro decks and burn decks and stuff like that. Gaining 5 life is usually pretty huge, and it can blank like 1 or 2 of their actual burn spells or attacks. Same thing with timely reinforcements, so we're able to set it in up against like heavy aggressive matchups. We can gain 6 life if we have less life than our opponent, and if we have fewer creatures than our opponent has, we get 3 1/1 White Soldier creature tokens for blockers usually. Grafdigger's Cage, so we can prevent our opponent from any manipulation that they have with putting creatures from like either their graveyard or from libraries into play, and they can't cast cards from graveyards or libraries as well, so in the case of them playing off the top of their library or something like that, we can prevent them from doing so. Engineered Explosives, so like if there are any really dedicated like token strategies, Engineered Explosives is really great for that. Even with stuff like Goblins and Elves, if your opponent's playing it and has like a lot of really, really narrow overlapping CMC stuff, like all of their creatures you notice are 1 or 2 CMC, the Engineered Explosives ends up just being a really good card to side in just because you can wrath a lot of their stuff very easily. Rest in Peace for any graveyard strategies, just kind of like a dedicated graveyard hate card on top of what we're already playing. Drown in Sorrow for any of like those really low CMC, just kind of really sly style decks. So if our opponent's playing like a lot of X2 or less creatures, we want to have the Drown in. Just a infest with a upside with the Scry. Crow's Grip for any of the decks that are playing a lot of enchantments or artifacts, especially if they're just playing like a equipment deck. We can side in the Crow's Grip to destroy stuff at a split-second speed, so they can't respond to it. Celestial Purge up against the red and black decks, especially if our opponent's playing just a dedicated red-black X type deck. The Celestial Purge ends up just being really great at exiling a red or black permanent. Another sword in here in the sideboard, which is Light and Shadow, so we're playing all 4 of the swords that we actually can play because Body and Mind is illegal. So Sword of Light and Shadow up against the decks that are playing black and white, or if we just want like hate for black or white, we can side it in for another target for our Stoneforge Mystic to be able to fetch for us. It effectively gives us creatures back and gains us some life as well, which is also great. And Aegis of the Gods, or otherwise True Believer, would be the other replacement, or just True Believer could be another card that you play on top of it. But Aegis of the Gods is really great just because it gives us hexproof, and it'll protect us up against decks that are just heavily trying to target us specifically. Especially whenever it comes to decks that are playing like Glimpse Unthinkable and like Mind Funeral and stuff like that, like just dedicated mill decks. If we get our Aegis and we can give ourselves hexproof, then we can protect ourselves pretty easily from any of that type of stuff from actually occurring. So that is our deck tech here for Anafenza the Foremost for Tiny Leaders. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the deck tech. The entire list is down in the description below where you guys can check it out and use it as a reference. And if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content. Until next time, guys, thank you for watching, and peace out.